The morning light over Narragansett Bay was almost too bright to look at. The brass band played Anchors Away, and every note seemed to vibrate inside my chest. I had imagined this day for years, the white uniform, the polished shoes, the certificate in my hands, the sound of my name echoing across the hall. I stood in formation with my class, every muscle locked in discipline, every heartbeat a countdown to freedom. When the announcer said Ensign Elise Hartley, I stepped forward, chin high, pulse steady. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to something that could not be taken from me. In the front row, my mother smiled for the cameras. Beside her sat Douglas Vaughn, my stepfather. His face was a perfect mask for the crowd, but I saw the tension in his jaw. He had never supported my choice to join the Navy. He said it was a waste of a degree, that I should have stayed in Providence and worked for him. I had ignored every word, every threat. This day was mine. I climbed the steps to the stage, took my certificate, saluted, and turned to the audience. The applause rolled through the room like a tide. I caught my mother's eyes, and for a moment she looked proud. Then Douglas stood. His chair scraped the floor, and the sound cut through the music. The applause faltered. I watched him approach the stage, his eyes locked on me. His expression twisted into something between anger and disbelief. He stopped just below the platform and whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. "You think you earned this, Leech?" The word hung in the air. A few people gasped. Before I could speak, his hand came up fast. The sound cracked across the hall like a rifle report. My head snapped sideways. My cap tilted one pin, clattering to the floor. For a split second, silence swallowed everything. The brass band froze. Even the flags behind me seemed to stop moving. I could feel the sting spreading across my cheek, but what hurt more was the look in the crowd, officers, cadets, families, all watching me like I was the disgrace, not him. My knees weakened. I tasted salt. Captain Hayes's voice cut through the silence. Calm but sharp. "At ease, officer. Step back." The words kept me standing. I straightened my shoulders, forced my body into stillness. I didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't touch my face. Douglas glared up at me as if daring me to react. My mother reached for him, pretending to restrain him, but she didn't look at me once. Behind the podium, I saw Cadet Rivers, my closest friend, frozen with his camera still recording. I met his eyes, then turned away. The world narrowed to the rhythm of my heart pounding too hard, too uneven. For a second, I thought it might actually stop. Captain Hayes stepped between us, his presence like a wall. "Mr. Vaughn, stand down." The officers in the first row moved toward Douglas, guiding him back, but his voice kept coming low and venomous. "You'll thank me someday. The humiliation will save you." I could barely hear him. All I heard was the rush of blood in my ears. The sunlight coming through the windows fractured into streaks across the polished floor. I focused on the sound of my breathing, trying to remember the drills that taught us control under pressure. Inhale, exhale, keep your spine straight. The ache in my chest pulsed with every heartbeat, heavier, slower, like my body was deciding whether to fight or collapse. A medic reached the stage, asking if I was all right. I nodded once. The ceremony continued, but I no longer heard it. My name still echoed faintly from the loudspeakers. Ensign Elise Hartley. The title felt hollow now, tainted by the echo of his hand. Later, in the small infirmary behind the hall, a Navy nurse checked my pulse and frowned. "Stress arrhythmia," she murmured, then smiled gently. "It happens under shock. Just breathe." I stared at the ceiling tiles and thought about how ironic it was. The man who called me weak had literally stopped my heart. Outside, I could hear the band starting again, the crowd pretending nothing had happened. Reputation mattered more than truth. Even in uniform, I was still the child they could humiliate without consequence. But deep inside, beneath the pain and shame, a thought began to take shape. He wanted this to be the moment that broke me. Instead, it would become the moment that defined me. I sat up slowly, the metal pin still clenched in my palm, and whispered to myself, "He made my heart stop, but he won't stop what comes next." Before we continue, tell me, what would you have done if someone hit you in uniform in front of your commanding officer? I was 13 the year my mother remarried. Providence, Rhode Island was small enough that everyone knew the name, Douglas Vaughn. He owned a string of furniture stores and talked about his comeback the way preachers talk about salvation. He drove a silver Mercedes, wore cufflinks even to Sunday brunch, and smiled like a man rehearsing for a photograph. When he married my mother, Margaret Hartley, she said we were finally going to live a stable life. At first, I believed her. Our house on Benefit Street smelled of lemon polish and candle wax. The walls were full of rules. No shoes on the stairs, no television before homework, no speaking unless spoken to. My mother called it structure. Douglas called it order. I called it a cage. He noticed everything: how I sat, how I chewed, how I breathed. If I dropped a fork, he would sigh and say, "You can't even hold a simple thing right." He liked to use silence as a punishment, withholding attention like air. My mother would smooth his arm and whisper, "She's just a child." He would answer, then she should start growing up. That was the rhythm of our home: her excuses, his corrections, my apologies. He managed his temper like a business, small, daily investments that paid out in control. When he failed in one of his ventures, he blamed me for distracting the household. "You bring bad luck," he once told me after a deal collapsed. "You're a charity case. Be grateful I feed you." I started counting the hours until I could leave for school every morning. Providence High was my only safe zone. Teachers called me disciplined. The truth was simpler discipline was survival. I learned to smile when I wanted to scream. I learned that quiet wasn't peace. It was strategy. My mother changed after the marriage, too. She spoke softer, laughed less, and wore pearls even when doing dishes. She said Douglas liked women who reflected dignity. She meant submission. On weekends, when they hosted clients, I was told to serve hors d'oeuvres and disappear. If guests asked about my plans, my mother would interrupt before I could answer. "She's still figuring it out," she'd say with a tight smile. What I was figuring out was how to escape. I spent nights reading about the Navy, about structure that built people instead of breaking them. The photos of ships at sea felt like open doors. When I told Douglas I wanted to apply to the Naval Academy, he laughed. "You in uniform, you wouldn't last a week. The Navy doesn't need charity mascots." My mother stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. That silence was louder than any insult. I kept my grades high, joined ROTC in high school, and filled every scholarship form I could find. When the acceptance letter arrived, I remember sitting in my room staring at the seal, an eagle clutching an anchor. Freedom looked like that. I brought the letter to dinner, heart pounding. "I got in," I said, holding it out. My mother froze, fork halfway to her mouth. Douglas leaned back in his chair, smiling without warmth. "Then pay for it yourself. I don't fund fantasies." My mother murmured, "Douglas, please," but he cut her off. "No. She wants to run around playing soldier. Let her see what real life costs." That night, I packed away the framed photo of us on the mantel, the one taken at their wedding. I realized families can look perfect and still be poison. I started working weekends at a coffee shop near Brown University, saving every tip. I kept the acceptance letter folded inside my wallet, the edges worn from being opened too many times. The day I left for training, my mother hugged me at the bus station. Her perfume smelled like the house I was trying to forget. "He doesn't mean to be cruel," she whispered. "He just wants the best." I pulled back and said quietly, "Then he should have learned how to love without hurting." She looked away. The bus pulled out, and I watched Providence shrink behind me, the skyline dissolving into mist. The farther I went, the lighter I felt, as if the air itself forgave me for surviving. At officer candidate school, they taught us that every command has a reason, every order a consequence. I already understood that better than most. Douglas had trained me in control, in silence, in endurance. The Navy would teach me to use those lessons for something other than fear. Years later, standing on that stage in Newport, his slap didn't surprise me. It was the final lesson of a man who couldn't stand the sight of the freedom he failed to own. What he didn't know was that every insult he ever gave me had already turned into armor. I had been learning how to fight long before I ever wore a uniform. February 2024. 2024 was colder than I expected when I arrived at Naval Station Newport. The wind off Narragansett Bay carried the smell of salt and steel. The buses from the airport dropped us at the OCS barracks before sunrise. By 0500, the petty officers were already shouting roll call. The sound of boots on asphalt became the background music of our lives. Sleep came in 4-hour stretches, food was swallowed in minutes, and mistakes were corrected in decibels. The first week broke plenty of candidates. Some quit before the first inspection. Others hid tears behind locked lockers. I stayed quiet, moving with the rhythm of commands until it became a kind of order that soothed me. When the world shouted, I learned to move faster instead of flinching. Lieutenant Carter, our company officer, was the only one who seemed to see more than just uniform creases. She was in her 30s, precise and calm. During a storm drill, she walked down the line and stopped in front of me. "Hartley," she said, "you look like someone who's been holding her breath for a decade. Stop waiting for permission to exhale." Later, she told our unit, "Discipline is how you survive chaos. The world outside doesn't hand out structure. We build it here." Those words lodged deep inside me. Every time my body screamed from the early runs or my shoulders trembled under the weight of gear, I repeated them like a prayer. The routine became my compass. 0430, Reveille uniform check, chow drills coursework. We learned to march in sync until it sounded like one heartbeat across the courtyard. Nights were for studying navigation charts under fluorescent light and ironing until fabric gleamed. The Navy stripped us down and built us again piece by piece until the person I used to be felt like another recruit's ghost. On Sundays, we got 1 hour to write emails or make calls. I used mine to send messages home. My mother replied once with a single line, "Douglas says he hopes you learn respect." I never answered. The distance felt cleaner than conversation. The rest of my emails went to Cadet Rivers, a classmate I'd met during orientation. He was sharp, always carrying a camera. "Pictures help me remember who I am," he told me. We became silent allies, two people who understood that survival sometimes meant recording the truth even if you didn't share it yet. By March, my body had adapted to the grind. I stopped noticing the cold that seeped through the dorm windows or the ache in my knees after endurance drills. The instructors pushed harder every week. Failure meant starting over. Quitting meant losing more than pride. It meant losing the version of yourself that could have made it. Lieutenant Carter reminded us that every decision we made reflected on the uniform. "Honor isn't a speech," she said. "It's the invisible weight you carry when no one's watching." I carried that weight everywhere. April brought leadership rotations. I was assigned platoon commander for a week. It meant accountability for everyone's performance, every late report, every missing bootlace. Douglas's voice echoed in my head the first night. "You can't lead what you don't control." I almost repeated his tone in my own orders before catching myself. Control wasn't leadership. Respect was. By the end of the week, our platoon scored highest in inspection. Lieutenant Carter stopped me outside the mess hall. "You've got quiet authority," she said. "Use it right." When graduation approached, the base changed. The smell of fresh paint filled the drill hall, flags replaced tarps, and the brass band rehearsed late into the evening. I was chosen to give the candidate address and honor given to the cadet with the best performance and conduct. When Captain Hayes announced my name, the company clapped. I felt proud, but also uneasy. The title honor graduate was something Douglas used to reserve for people who advanced his reputation. For me, it was just proof that I could build a life without his help. The administration asked for family contacts to send invitations. I hesitated before typing my mother's email. It had been months since we spoke. The cursor blinked like a question. In the end, I sent 2 messages, one to her, one to Douglas. The note was short. Graduation May 10th, 2024. Newport, you're welcome to attend. I waited a week. No reply. I told myself I didn't care, but every night when we ran along the seawall, I caught myself glancing toward the empty docks, wondering if the next email alert might carry her name. The final evaluation week felt endless. We stood inspection in full dress uniform under freezing rain, faces still, hands steady. The flag whipped so violently that it drowned out the instructor's commands. When they pinned the insignia on my collar, I didn't smile. The pride I felt was quieter, steadier, like the hum of an engine running beneath the surface. It wasn't triumph, it was release. On the last evening before graduation, Lieutenant Carter found me cleaning my boots in the common room. "You ready for the stage?" she asked. "Ready enough," I said. She smiled. That's all readiness ever means. Remember, the people in the audience see your uniform. Only you know the story behind it. After she left, I checked my phone one last time. Still no message from home. Outside, the wind rattled the window frames. I thought of Providence, the silence after dinner, the rules, the way my mother's eyes dimmed under Douglas's shadow. The Navy wasn't just training. It was therapy in disguise. It stripped away the noise and left only truth. The next morning, the bay was glassy under a pale sky. We lined up for the rehearsal, white uniforms glowing against the water. Captain Hayes stood at the podium reviewing the order of ceremony. I spotted the reserved seating chart taped beside the stage family section, row 1. 2 empty spaces were marked under my name. I traced the letters with my finger, then folded the paper back down. Whether they came or not, I was going to stand tall. Later that evening, I sent one final email. Graduation confirmed for 0900 hours tomorrow. If you come, please be on time. I hit send and shut the device off. No prayers, no expectations. Freedom. I realized always comes at a price. Mine was learning to stop waiting for people who never intended to show up. The night before graduation, I dreamed I was back on the stage again. The hall was silent, every seat empty, the flag motionless. I stood at the podium trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then I saw a shadow move across the floor, long and deliberate. Douglas stepped from the darkness, his hand reaching for my shoulder. When I tried to step away, the stage gave way beneath my feet. I woke up with my heart hammering against my ribs, the barracks still cloaked in the pre-dawn blue. The digital clock read 04:30. Outside, the wind howled across Narragansett Bay. I sat on the edge of my bunk until the panic ebbed, repeating to myself that it was just a dream, just the residue of years spent waiting for his hand to fall again. The day began like any other inspection morning. The scent of starch and shoe polish filled the air. I pulled on my service dress whites, the fabric stiff and immaculate, every fold ironed sharp enough to cut. Cadet Rivers stepped in, balancing his camera as usual. "You're shaking," he said quietly. I smiled. "Just adrenaline." He helped adjust my shoulder boards until the gold stripes aligned perfectly. "You'll do fine," he said. "You always do." I nodded, though something in my chest refused to settle. By 0700, the corridors hummed with last-minute orders. The ceremony hall was already filling with guests, families, officers, local reporters. The band rehearsed Eternal Father Strong to Save, and the sound echoed off the high ceiling. As we lined up backstage, Captain Hayes passed by, checking uniforms with his usual composure. "Breathe, candidates," he said, his tone light. "This is your moment. Don't rush it." I exhaled, steadying my hands, then followed the line toward the entrance doors. The sunlight spilling through the glass made the brass buttons on my jacket glint like fire. When I looked toward the front rows, the air in my lungs thinned. My mother sat in the center aisle, dressed in pale blue pearls gleaming at her throat. Douglas sat beside her in a tailored suit, one hand resting on his knee, the other gesturing casually as he spoke to a man with a press badge. The reporter nodded, taking notes. The sight froze me in place. My mother turned briefly, caught my eyes, and smiled. It was a soft, rehearsed smile, the same one she used at charity dinners when pretending nothing was wrong. I felt the temperature of the room drop, even though the morning sun poured through the windows. Rivers followed my gaze. "They showed up," he whispered. I forced my lips into a shape that might pass for a smile. "Of course they did." As we waited for the cue to march in, I couldn't shake the image of Douglas leaning toward that reporter, whispering with that calculated tilt of his head. His gestures were familiar, the same ones he used in board meetings when spinning stories. He had always been skilled at controlling a narrative. Maybe that was why seeing him here felt like standing at the edge of another ambush. When my name was called for rehearsal sound check, I walked across the stage to the podium. The microphone carried my breath through the speakers, a faint hiss that filled the empty hall. "Testing 1, 2. Captain Hayes gave a nod from the side. "Good projection, Ensign Hartley. Keep that calm when the seats fill." I managed a smile. But when I looked again at the audience area, Douglas had turned in his chair and was staring directly at me. His expression wasn't pride. It was assessment. After rehearsal, we were allowed 30 minutes of rest before the official start. I found a quiet corner behind the curtains and checked my phone. No messages. The silence almost felt like mercy. The wind outside picked up rattling the windows, and the sound reminded me of that night years ago when I told him I was joining the Navy. The same low growl of a storm waiting to break. Rivers appeared again, camera strap slung across his shoulder. "Your family's already talking to the local paper," he said. "That guy from Providence Journal. He was asking about your upbringing, how supportive they've been." I laughed once dry and sharp. Supportive. That's one way to spell ownership. The minutes before the ceremony passed like a slow march. The brass band tuned their instruments, the audience whispered, and every breath seemed too loud. Behind the curtain, I adjusted my cap, tugging it low enough to shadow my eyes. The mirror near the backstage door showed my reflection, controlled, composed, unshakable. But my pulse told another story. Captain Hayes's aide entered clipboard in hand. 5 minutes, he said. The line of graduates straightened instinctively. I caught the faint scent of floor polish and perfume drifting from the front row. My mother's favorite brand. The memory of her voice saying, "He just wants the best for you," flashed through my head like static. I swallowed hard. As the national anthem began, we filed out in pairs. The hall seemed smaller now, every eye locked on the white of our uniforms. I scanned the first row only once. Douglas was smiling, but it wasn't warmth. It was possession. He had the look of someone who believed he still controlled the story. My mother's smile beside him was glass smooth, reflective, fragile. When I reached my seat on the stage, Rivers leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "You look pale." I whispered back, "It's just the light." But deep inside, a pulse of cold traveled down my spine. Something was wrong. It wasn't just fear. It was recognition. That particular stillness in Douglas's posture meant he was waiting for an audience. The ceremony hadn't even begun, and already the air tasted like anticipation and danger. The kind that comes before thunder when the sky looks too calm to trust. From the side aisle, a young lieutenant passed by and murmured quietly, "Your family made quite the impression already." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. I turned my gaze forward, eyes fixed on the flag above the stage, and focused on the simple rhythm of breathing. Inhale, exhale, hold. It was the only thing that felt like mine. The band shifted to a new song, the doors closed, and the sound of the crowd softened into stillness. The ceremony was about to begin, and even though I didn't yet know what form it would take, I could already feel the storm standing just behind that perfect smile. The brass band's final chord faded beneath the steady hum of conversation. I stood behind the curtain, hands clasped behind my back, counting the seconds to my cue. The air smelled of polished wood and starch. When Captain Hayes nodded, I stepped forward into the light. The applause rose polite and measured the kind reserved for someone no one truly knows yet. My heels clicked on the floorboards as I reached the podium. The microphone was warm beneath my fingers. For a moment, I stared at the sea of uniforms and faces, rows of white caps and glinting medals. My voice came out softer than I intended, but steady. "When I arrived here 3 months ago, I thought discipline meant perfection," I said. "Now I know it means perseverance. It means standing tall when you feel small. It means knowing when to listen and when to speak." The crowd quieted. Even the rustle of programs stopped. I continued finding rhythm in my own honesty. We came here as individuals. We leave as officers bound not by rank but by responsibility. The Navy doesn't ask who we were. It asks who we choose to become. For the briefest instant, I let myself believe the moment could stay untouched by anything outside this hall. Then I glanced toward the first row. Douglas sat beside my mother. His arms crossed his mouth, drawn into that familiar half-smile that meant he was calculating. He looked at his watch not once, but twice, like he was timing the performance of a show he'd already decided to hate. My mother leaned toward him, whispering something. He didn't react. I forced my eyes back to the script, finishing the speech with the same calm that had carried me through every drill. When I stepped away from the podium, the applause felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The commissioning segment began. One by one, the candidates approached the stage to receive their pins and certificates. Families stood for photographs, laughter blending with applause. When my turn came, Captain Hayes gestured me forward. "Ensign Elise Hartley," he announced. The title struck my chest like sunlight. I saluted, accepted the certificate, and turned toward the audience. My mother rose halfway, clapping with a poised smile. Douglas stayed seated. His eyes met mine with a flicker of contempt that tightened my throat. Captain Hayes pinned the insignia onto my lapel. "Well earned," he said quietly. I thanked him, stepped back, and turned to exit the stage. That was when I heard it. A chair, scraping loud enough to cut through the applause. Douglas was standing now, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness. Playing soldier now. His voice carried easily across the room, or still leeching off the family name. The words froze me mid-step. Conversation stopped. The applause died mid-clap. My mother's face drained of color, though she stayed seated. Every eye in the hall swung toward him. He smiled as if he'd been waiting for that silence. "Mr. Vaughn," Captain Hayes began, but Douglas lifted a hand. "Just a proud stepfather giving his support," he said, the sarcasm slick as oil. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, then faded when no one joined. I should have walked away. I should have let it pass. But something inside me refused to keep shrinking. I turned toward him, meeting his gaze. "You taught me plenty about pride," I said quietly. "And none of it had honor in it." His expression shifted, the smile twitching. "Careful," he murmured. Then he took a step closer to the stage. The officers in the first row stirred, unsure whether to intervene. My mother whispered his name, but he ignored her. He stopped just below the platform, close enough for me to see the pulse jump in his neck. "You think this uniform changes who you are?" he said louder now. "You'll always need someone to clean up your mess." His hand moved, a blur of motion that came faster than thought. The crack echoed like a shot. My head snapped sideways. The world tilted. Gasps tore through the hall. My cap fell rolling across the floor. The sting seared my cheek, but my body locked into the instinct of standing at attention. I did not move. I did not cry. Captain Hayes was already shouting, "Security!" Two petty officers rushed forward, grabbing Douglas by the arms. He struggled, yelling something about discipline, about how a little correction never hurt anyone. My mother stood abruptly, clutching her pearls, then collapsed back into her chair as if the scene had drained the air from her lungs. People surged to their feet. The hall erupted in voices, shock, disbelief, the sound of reputations cracking. "Clear the hall," Hayes commanded. "Now!" Rivers was still filming, frozen for a second before instinct kicked in. He stepped aside, camera steady, recording everything. I could see the reflection of the chaos in the brass of his lens. He caught my eye, once gave the faintest nod, and turned the focus back toward Douglas being escorted out. The officers moved swiftly, clearing guests through the side doors. The noise receded into echoes. Someone guided me toward the back corridor. My vision narrowed until all I could see were the shoes moving in front of me. I heard fragments of conversation, assault, unbelievable base jurisdiction. The words didn't land. My own pulse drowned them out. In the small infirmary behind the hall, the light was too bright. A Navy nurse pressed a stethoscope to my chest. "Deep breath," she said softly. My lungs obeyed, but my heart lagged behind. The rhythm was uneven, skipping like a scratched record. She frowned and adjusted the monitor. "You've got stress-induced arrhythmia, not uncommon after a trauma response. We'll keep you for observation." I stared at the white wall behind her, focusing on the sterile hum of the equipment. My cheek throbbed in rhythm with the beeping heart monitor. I could still hear the echo of his voice, playing soldier, now looping through my head. It felt less like a question and more like a claim. The nurse adjusted my IV line and said something about fluids, but her words blurred into the background. Captain Hayes entered quietly, his expression controlled. He stopped beside the bed and removed his cap. "You did well not to retaliate," he said. "That's not weakness, that's composure." "He wanted me to fall apart," I said. "He needed an audience. He got one," Hayes replied. "But so did you." I looked down at my hands, still trembling. "They'll say it's my fault." "People always talk," he said. "Let them. The Navy will handle the legal side. You focus on breathing." He paused, then added, "That kind of restraint takes more strength than most men I've commanded." When he left, the room felt larger and emptier. The nurse dimmed the light. I lay back, listening to the steady beep of the monitor. The rhythm steadied but stayed fragile. I whispered the words more to myself than anyone else. He made my heart stop. The nurse glanced over, half smiling. Then make sure he never gets the chance again. Hours later, as evening settled over the bay, I was cleared to return to quarters. I walked through the corridor lined with silent flags. Every step echoed louder than the last. Outside, the sun was slipping into the horizon, the sky streaked with the same colors as the ribbon on my uniform. I paused by a window and saw my reflection face, marked eyes hollow but steady. Down on the pier, 2 security officers were loading Douglas into a waiting vehicle. His head was lowered now, the arrogance drained. My mother followed a few steps behind, holding her purse like a shield. She looked up, once saw me in the window, and turned away. The car door closed, sealing them both inside their silence. I stayed there until the taillights disappeared beyond the gate. The cold air seeped through the glass, but I didn't move. Something inside me shifted the kind of quiet that comes after a storm but before the rebuilding. For the first time, I realized that silence could belong to me too. It didn't have to mean obedience. It could mean peace. The ceremony was over, but the reckoning had only begun. For 3 days after the ceremony, I stayed in my quarters with the blinds drawn. The rhythm of base life continued outside morning drills, bugle calls, the metallic echo of cadence, but inside my room, time didn't move. The bruise on my cheek had faded from red to yellow, then to something less visible, but more permanent. The uniform that once felt like armor hung on the back of my chair, its white fabric now a reminder of the moment that stripped everything bare. The hospital note sat folded on my desk, stress-induced arrhythmia. Rest recommended. It sounded too simple for what it meant. The command issued a brief statement to local media. An incident occurred during the officer candidate school graduation ceremony. Military police are cooperating with civilian authorities. They didn't name me or Douglas, but everyone on base already knew. The whispers reached even the cafeteria line, cadets pretending not to glance up when I passed instructors lowering their voices mid-sentence. I could feel their questions in every silence. Was she to blame? Did she provoke him? I didn't answer. The quiet was safer than explanations. On the 4th morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rivers. "We need to talk." The video's circulating. My stomach tightened. Within hours, the recording of Douglas hitting me had spread through the OCS cadet group chat. Someone had uploaded it anonymously, maybe thinking it was the only way the truth could survive. It had been trimmed to 20 seconds, just long enough to capture the insult, the slap, and the stunned silence after. I watched it once. The sound of the impact was louder than I remembered. My face barely flinched, but the freeze frame showed everything my composure had tried to hide: the shock, the betrayal, the shame. The next message came from an unknown number: "Cease and desist. Any further distribution will be met with legal action." Attached was a scanned document signed by Douglas's attorney accusing me of defamation through omission. He claimed the video was deceptively edited, that I had orchestrated humiliation for personal gain. My hands shook as I read the words. A few hours later, an email from my mother arrived. The subject line read simply, "Please." The message said, he was stressed. "You know how he gets when he feels cornered. Don't ruin his reputation over one mistake. Delete the footage and move on. This family can't survive another scandal." I read it twice, waiting for something: remorse, compassion, anything, but there was only that familiar mixture of denial and self-preservation. I closed my laptop without replying. The silence this time wasn't weakness. It was strategy. I printed the email and tucked it inside the same folder as the medical report. That night, I sat on my bunk, listening to the rain drum against the window. The base lights glowed through the fog, blurring into pale orbs. I thought about all the years Douglas had used words like discipline and control to disguise cruelty. How my mother had confused endurance with loyalty. How easy it had been for them to rewrite every story while I was still too young to hold a pen. But now I had evidence: the camera, the footage, the report. Proof that truth didn't need permission to exist. The next morning, I was summoned to Captain Hayes's office. The hallway leading there felt longer than usual. Every step echoed against the tile a countdown to something I couldn't name. His door was half open. I knocked twice. Enter. He was standing by the window uniform, crisp coffee steaming on his desk. Have a seat, Ensign. I sat posture rigid. The window behind him looked out over the training field where new candidates were running laps through the mist. I've reviewed the incident report, he began, voice even, and the medical file. The civilian authorities have jurisdiction since Mr. Vaughn isn't under our command. That said, this base will not tolerate harassment of its personnel. Yes, sir. He studied me for a moment. You're handling this with restraint. I respect that, but I need to ask you something. What do you plan to do next? The question hung there. For a second, I didn't know if he was warning me or inviting me to act. Sir, I said, choosing each word carefully, I've spent most of my life being told to stay quiet to protect someone else's image. I'm done doing that. His gaze didn't waver. You realize this could become public. Your name, your career, it could all be dragged through media circuits. The Navy doesn't shield officers from personal exposure. I understand, I said, but the truth doesn't need protection. I do. He nodded slowly. Then define it with truth, Ensign. Whatever you do it with integrity. That's what separates us from the noise outside these gates. When I left his office, the fog had lifted slightly. The bay glimmered under a weak sun. The gulls circled low, crying over the waves. I pulled my collar up against the wind and thought about what he'd said. Define it with truth. It wasn't advice. It was a command dressed as permission. Back in my quarters, I opened the folder again. Inside were the printed email, the medical report, and the flash drive Rivers had handed me that morning. Keep this off the cloud, he'd said. Metadata's clean. If they try to scrub the version online, at least one copy survives. I ran my thumb over the drive's plastic edge. The urge to send it straight to the press flared up, but I forced myself to think strategically. Timing mattered more than anger. By evening, rumors had evolved into half-truths. Some cadets whispered that Douglas had already filed a civil complaint. Others said he'd called in favors with donors. Every version of the story made me smaller, weaker, easier to dismiss. The humiliation didn't come from the slap itself anymore. It came from watching people decide which version of me to believe. That night, I wrote a brief note in my journal. He wanted to control the narrative. Let him try. I have the facts, and facts don't flinch. On the third evening, as I walked back from the mess hall, a group of younger cadets paused in conversation when I passed. One of them, a girl barely 20, looked at me with something between fear and admiration. "Ma'am," she said softly, "we saw the clip. I just wanted to say you stood your ground. I hope I'd do the same." Her voice cracked on the last word. I smiled, not out of pride, but because I recognized that tremor. It was the sound of someone realizing silence is a choice, not a sentence. Later that night, alone in my room, I opened the window and let the cold air wash in. The bruise on my cheek had almost faded, but my reflection in the glass looked different, older, sharper. I thought of Douglas sitting in his office, surrounded by lawyers trying to turn a moment of truth into another negotiation. I thought of my mother rehearsing her lines for sympathy. Somewhere, deep inside, a quiet voice rose through the noise. You owe them nothing. The next morning, I drafted a formal response to the attorney's letter. One sentence, nothing more. All statements and recordings referenced are factual and verifiable. Further correspondence will be directed to Military Legal Counsel. I printed it, signed it, and slipped it under the door of the JAG office before dawn. As the first rays of sunlight hit the base flag, I stood at attention in the courtyard, hands behind my back, the wind cold against my face. The anthem played over the loudspeaker's notes, cutting through the morning air. It wasn't triumph I felt, or relief, it was clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. They had taken my silence for obedience. Now, silence would be my weapon. Would you stay silent to protect your family's name, or fight for your own? 3 weeks after the ceremony, the world had moved on, or at least pretended to. But for me, silence had turned into a mission. Every night after lights out, I sat at my desk in the dim glow of the lamp, sorting through years of fragments that suddenly looked like evidence. Old emails, credit card records, therapy invoices from when my mother had breakdowns, and screenshots of text messages that had once made me flinch, but now made me focus. Each one was a breadcrumb leading back to Douglas Vaughn, the man who had built his empire on intimidation disguised as charisma. Cadet Rivers became my quiet ally. He had kept a clean copy of the footage untouched stored offline. When I asked why, he said simply, "Because truth deserves a backup." Together, we decided to route it through official channels, the Judge Advocate General's office. Rivers had a friend there, a junior investigator who specialized in ethics complaints. The video was sent anonymously encrypted and time-stamped from a base terminal. Within hours, we received a single reply, "Acknowledged. Under review." From that point, I started digging deeper. If Douglas wanted a war of narratives, I would fight with facts. Using his business registry information, I traced the web of his companies through public filings. It didn't take long to find the cracks. 2 years ago, a financial auditor had flagged irregularities in one of his Providence ventures, questionable loans to subsidiaries. Another document hinted at employee complaints of withheld wages and verbal abuse. None had gone to trial. All had been quietly settled. The pattern was clear: money, silence, repetition. One evening, I went to the base library to access archived public records. I remember the librarian, an older veteran named Mr. Dwyer, glancing up from his desk. "Doing research, Ensign?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said. "Personal." He nodded knowingly. "Sometimes personal is what leads to justice." That line stayed with me. When I found the report confirming Douglas's prior misconduct with subordinates, I printed it and slid it into the same folder as the video. The evidence was starting to breathe no longer isolated pieces, but a story ready to stand on its own. Meanwhile, Captain Hayes watched quietly from the periphery. He didn't ask questions he didn't need to ask. One afternoon, after I'd spent hours in the records office, he called me into his quarters. The blinds were half-drawn sunlight cutting across the desk. "You're spending a lot of time on this," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. "Yes, sir." He studied me. "You have a plan. I'm working on one." He leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "You know what happens when you expose someone like Vaughn. Men like him don't go quietly. They go theatrical." I met his gaze. Then maybe it's time his audience sees the whole performance. A flicker of respect crossed his face. "If you're going to do this, do it clean. Don't let anger make you sloppy. Truth is only powerful when it's undeniable." I nodded. "Understood." By early March, the opportunity presented itself. Douglas was scheduled to speak at the Navy Marine Charity Gala, a black tie fundraiser held every spring at the Newport Officers Club. He was one of the event's biggest donors, using his philanthropy to cement influence among local elites. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same man who had humiliated a naval officer in front of the flag would now stand beneath one and deliver a lecture on family values. That night, I stood in my room holding the invitation that had arrived in the mail addressed to Ensign Elise Hartley, honored graduate. My pulse thudded once steady and decisive. It was time. Over the following week, I refined every detail. Rivers handled the technical setup. "We can cue the video to autoplay from the media screen," he explained. "All you'll need is a trigger." He was nervous, but loyal. "Are you sure about this, Elise? It'll go public in seconds." "I'm sure," I said. He chose the stage. I'll just let him perform. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. I reviewed my notes over and over, the timeline of his abuse, the documentation of his lawsuits, the receipts of my own restraint. My mother had sent another email that afternoon, begging me not to attend. "He's under pressure, Elise. Please don't make this worse. Think of what people will say." I didn't reply. I'd already spent half my life thinking about what people would say. Tomorrow they would see. When dawn came, the base was quiet. I went for a run along the edge of the bay, the cold air cutting through my lungs, sharpening every thought. The horizon glowed gold and gray, and I whispered to myself, "This is not revenge. This is correction." That afternoon, I ironed my uniform until the creases looked like intent. Each ribbon, each pin sat exactly where regulation dictated. By the time the sun dipped below the harbor, I was ready. The gala's ballroom shimmered under chandeliers filled with officers, civilians, and donors in tuxedos. Waiters passed champagne glasses like currency. A jazz trio played softly near the stage where Douglas would speak. I arrived quietly, taking a seat near the back. No one noticed me, just another uniform among hundreds. From across the room, I saw him. Perfect suit, confident grin, shaking hands with an admiral he'd once bragged about golfing with. My mother stood beside him, smiling like she belonged in the frame. I couldn't hear their words, but I recognized the posture of control, the charm that had fooled everyone else for years. Rivers texted me from the control booth, "System ready. Signal when you're set." I typed back, "Wait for his toast." When the MC called Douglas to the podium, the applause swelled. He took the microphone, flashing his signature smile. "It's an honor to stand before the men and women who serve our country," he began. "Discipline, courage, and above all, family. These are the values that built our Navy and our nation." My hands curled around the edge of my table. I watched the audience nod along, drinking in every word. The man had turned hypocrisy into an art form. Behind him, the projector's standby light blinked a small, silent heartbeat waiting to expose him. Across the room, Captain Hayes caught my eye. He didn't smile, but his expression said everything. "Proceed." The next words out of Douglas's mouth were, "To honor." And that was the cue. I sent the signal. The lights dimmed, the jazz cut out, and the screen behind him flickered to life. A still frame appeared first. His hand, mid-swing, my face turned to the American flag blurred behind us. Then the sound followed. The gasp, the slap, the silence. The ballroom froze. Every truth I'd buried had found its voice. I stood slowly, feeling years of restraint lift off my shoulders like dust shaken from a flag. Tomorrow would bring fallout headlines, investigations, but tonight belonged to truth, and truth was finally loud enough to drown him out. The chandeliers glittered like frozen fire above the Newport Officers Club, their light spilling across polished silver and champagne glasses. Outside, the bay shimmered in the dark, its calm surface betraying nothing of the storm about to break. 3 weeks had passed since the ceremony, and Douglas Vaughn had returned to his favorite stage, the spotlight. The evening's event was the annual Navy Marine Charity Gala, a fundraiser for veterans and scholarships, an occasion soaked in words like honor, family, and duty. Douglas had sponsored the night, his name printed in gold across the programs. He'd bought his redemption ticket, or so he thought. I stood near the back of the room, my service dress whites sharp, my posture still. To most people, I was just another young officer. To him, I was invisible. The jazz band faded as the MC took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's keynote speaker, Mr. Douglas Vaughn." Applause followed, like habit, polite but not enthusiastic. Cameras rose. The local news crew had come to record the philanthropist who had overcome adversity. He adjusted his tie, walked with the same measured arrogance that had once filled every room of my childhood. My mother followed him to the stage, smiling as though forgiveness were her only accessory. Douglas's voice filled the ballroom, smooth and calculated. "Thank you for that warm welcome," he began. "It's an honor to stand before the men and women who safeguard our nation's integrity. Tonight, we celebrate discipline, courage, and the foundation of every great legacy family." I felt my jaw tighten. He was weaponizing the very words he'd shattered. Around me, heads nodded, glasses clinked. Admiral Hayes sat near the front, composed but watchful. He knew. He had approved what was about to happen. Douglas continued, his tone swelling with self-importance. "Discipline is not about control. It's about love expressed through boundaries. Too many people today mistake guidance for cruelty, but true family never abandons its own." The irony was suffocating. My heartbeat slowed, steady, trained. The projector technician at the back Rivers caught my eye and gave the faintest nod. The file was loaded. The moment waited. Douglas lifted his champagne glass, light catching on the rim. "So tonight," he said, smiling toward the cameras, "we toast to honor." The words struck the air like a cue line, and right on their echo the room went dark. A sharp click sounded as the spotlight on him died. For one suspended breath, everything froze. Then the massive screen behind him flickered to life. The image appeared grainy at first, then sharpened into a scene everyone recognized: the graduation hall, the American flag, the white of Navy uniforms. The room inhaled collectively. The video began to play. "Playing soldier now," or still leeching off the name. Douglas's voice, crystal clear through the ballroom's speakers, filled every corner. Then the sound that silenced even the music in people's heads, the slap. It echoed again, magnified, followed by the shocked murmur of the audience in that recording. My figure stood on screen unmoving, dignified in stillness. The image froze at the exact moment his hand connected with my face. The text on the screen read, "Recorded at Naval Station Newport, May 2024. No narration, no commentary, just evidence." The room went still. A fork clattered somewhere in the back, the sound oddly deafening. I could see Douglas stiffen his hand still mid-air from the aborted toast. His smile vanished, replaced by the pale confusion of a man caught by the truth he thought he'd buried. "Turn it off!" he barked, his voice cracking. No one moved. The MC glanced toward the booth, but Rivers stood calmly, hands clasped behind his back. Admiral Hayes remained seated, eyes locked on Douglas' expression unreadable. The video replayed once more, shorter this time, the clip trimmed for impact. Each repetition burned deeper. My mother's hands flew to her mouth, her body folded in on itself as she sank back into her chair, face gray. "That was honor, sir," I said from the back, my voice cutting through the stunned quiet. Every head turned. I stepped forward, heels echoing against the marble. His version of it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras swiveled from the stage to me. Douglas turned eyes, wild sweat gathering at his collar. "She's lying!" he shouted. "That video was edited. She planned this." His microphone was still on. His voice thundered through the speakers, desperate too loud. The guests flinched at the volume. "She's been unstable for years," he yelled, gesturing toward me. "Ask her mother." His words spun out, collapsing into incoherence. My mother shook her head slowly, tears streaming. "Douglas, stop." He ignored her. "You think I'm the villain? I built everything? She's nothing without me?" His hand slammed onto the podium, rattling the glass. The feedback squealed sharp and merciless. The audience murmured, shifting from shock to disgust. A woman near the front whispered, "He hit her in uniform." A man beside her muttered, "On base property. That's assault." The reporters, once passive, began recording again, lenses trained on the unraveling performance. The screen behind him froze on the final frame. My face in profile eyes, steady bruise just forming the flag behind me. The juxtaposition was brutal. Mr. Vaughn, Admiral Hayes's voice cut through the chaos, calm, authoritative. "Step away from the podium." Douglas turned toward him, trembling with fury. "You think you can lecture me about honor?" he spat. "I've donated more to this Navy than you've earned in your lifetime." And tonight, Hayes replied evenly, "You've donated your reputation." The audience gasped. The air shifted, a collective awareness that the illusion had shattered. Douglas stumbled back a step, his bravado cracking. Security personnel from the Officers' Club approached the stage quietly but firmly. My mother covered her face, sobbing softly. "I told you to stop," she whispered. He didn't hear her. He was still shouting, still trying to rewrite reality. "This is manipulation. She's after money fame. Money can't buy back integrity," I said, my voice calm now, every syllable measured. I took another step forward, standing within the pool of light that had once belonged to him. "For years you taught me that silence was respect, that endurance was loyalty. But real loyalty protects what's right, not who's wrong." The reporters caught every word. Cameras flashed, capturing the symmetry of reversal. The abuser cornered the survivor unflinching. Douglas tried to lunge toward the screen, perhaps to rip out the cord, but security intercepted him. His shout fractured mid-sentence, fading into the muffled protests of a man who no longer owned the room. "You think this ends me?" he hissed as they led him away. "It already did," I said quietly. My mother didn't move as he was escorted past her. Her pearl necklace had snapped, beads scattered across the floor like small, hard truths rolling in every direction. The applause began, slowly unsure at first, then gathering momentum. It wasn't for me exactly, it was for the collapse of a lie. Hayes stood offering a brief salute that was more acknowledgement than celebration. I returned it, my hands steady. The screen went black. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was reverent. The kind of silence that comes after something sacred is restored. A journalist approached hesitantly. "Ensign Hartley," he said, voice low. "Would you like to make a statement?" I looked around at the sea of faces, officers, donors, strangers, each one processing what they'd witnessed. "No," I said. "The statement's already made." I turned and walked toward the exit. As I passed the doors, I heard someone whisper, "She didn't just save herself. She reminded us what honor means." Outside, the night air was sharp and clean, the kind that wakes you up from a long fog. The bay glowed under the moonlight calm again. I paused on the steps, feeling the weight in my chest shift from pain to something lighter. Behind me, the murmurs inside grew into chaos, press questions, angry voices, the first notes of a reckoning. I didn't look back. The wind off the water carried the faint echo of the video's last line, the one I hadn't planned but had become the truth anyway. That was Honor Sir, his version of it. For the first time, his version no longer mattered. Theirs wouldn't either. The truth had already chosen its side. By dawn the next morning, the story had already left the ballroom and invaded every television phone and front page across Rhode Island. The Providence Journal headline read in thick black print, "Businessman assaults Navy officer video, sparks outrage." Below it was a still frame from the Gala Douglas's hand mid-air and my face half-turned, eyes cold, mouth silent. The caption said, "Ensign Elise Hartley, U.S. Navy, remains composed as stepfather strikes her during commissioning ceremony." No one cared that I hadn't given a statement. The footage spoke for itself. Within hours, the clip had gone viral on social media under the hashtag #HonorMeansAccountability. Comment sections swarmed with veterans officers and ordinary people who had seen too many men like him get away with everything. He hit a Navy officer in uniform on base. One comment read, "That's federal assault." For the first time, strangers were saying the words I'd swallowed for years. By noon, reporters gathered outside the Newport gate. The base had gone into tight media lockdown. Captain Hayes issued an internal memo reminding all personnel to refrain from unauthorized statements, but privately he stopped by my quarters. "They'll dig," he warned. "They'll call your high school, your professors, anyone they can. Don't answer. The truth's already public. You don't need to defend it." His eyes softened. "You did exactly what was right." I nodded, still processing the velocity of it all. He turned to leave, then paused. "Remember what I told you, ensign truth outranks power." The words landed heavy but solid. I clung to them like coordinates in a storm. 2 days later, the military police liaison confirmed that Douglas was under formal investigation for assault on federal property. The charge carried weight because the slap had taken place within a naval facility jurisdiction belonged to the Department of Defense. Federal prosecutors requested all evidence from JAG, including the video medical report and the original Gala recording. The law firm representing Douglas tried to spin the narrative. Their first statement to the press claimed he had been emotionally provoked by a misunderstanding. Their second statement, released a day later after the first one was mocked online, said he was deeply regretful and would seek reconciliation with his family. None of it helped. His company's board of directors convened an emergency meeting that same week. By Friday, the shareholders had suspended him indefinitely, citing ethical breaches detrimental to corporate integrity. News outlets replayed his gala meltdown side by side with his corporate promotional videos, the contrast grotesque. Navy Procurement Office released its own quiet memo confirming that all pending contracts with Vaughn Enterprises were frozen pending federal review. Millions in defense supply work disappeared overnight. The empire he'd built on intimidation was collapsing faster than he could find someone else to blame. I watched all of it unfold, not with triumph, but with a strange calm. It wasn't vengeance, it was equilibrium returning. Justice had its own rhythm, deliberate and exact. When I was called to testify as a witness for the JAG inquiry, I dressed in my uniform, every pin polished, every line precise. The hearing took place in a small courtroom inside the base legal building. The American flag stood behind the judge advocate's bench, its shadow stretching across the floor. Douglas sat at the defense table, his once perfect suit hanging loose. The arrogance drained, but not entirely gone. He didn't look at me as I entered. My mother sat in the second row, clutching a tissue, her face pale. The air smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. The legal officer asked me to take the stand. My oath came easily, the words crisp and certain. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "Yes, ma'am." My statement lasted exactly 15 minutes. I described the sequence at the graduation, the verbal provocation, the slap, the aftermath. I avoided adjectives. I didn't need them. The footage in the medical report filled every space between the sentences. When I finished, the room was silent. The defense attorney cleared his throat. "Miss Hartley, Ensign," I corrected gently. His jaw tightened. "Ensign Hartley, do you believe your stepfather intended to harm you physically?" "I believe intent stopped mattering when he crossed the line of honor," I said. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge advocate raised a hand for silence. "Proceed." The lawyer hesitated, then sat down. The hearing adjourned without further questioning. Outside, cameras waited beyond the fence, reporters shouting questions I didn't answer. That night, when I returned to my quarters, the base email inbox was flooded, some from strangers, some from female officers across the country. "You reminded us we don't have to stay quiet. Your composure gave me courage to file my own report. I read every one. Each message felt like a small anchor dropped into waterproof that silence could transform into strength when it finally spoke." The next week, the verdict arrived. Douglas Vaughn was found guilty of assault on a commissioned officer and obstruction of federal investigation due to his attempts to suppress evidence. The sentence, 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, public apology issued to the U.S. Navy, and a lifetime ban from contracting with any federal agency. It wasn't prison, but it was enough to strip him of the image he prized most: respectability. The Providence Journal ran another headline: "Vaughn convicted truth outranks power, says naval officer." Captain Hayes had given that quote to the reporter, not me. When I read it, I smiled for the first time in weeks. My mother requested to meet me the following day. She arrived at the base visitor center wearing a beige coat that looked too thin for the cold. Her hands trembled as she removed her gloves. "Elise," she said softly, "you've made your point. Please, don't let him go to jail. He's lost everything. What good will more punishment do?" Her voice cracked on the last word. I studied her face, the same one I'd once tried so hard to protect. "Mom," I said quietly, "I didn't ruin him. He did that himself. You could help him now," she pleaded. A statement to the court, a request for leniency. I shook my head. He never showed leniency when it was his turn. You chose your side long ago. Her lips parted as if to argue, then closed. The realization settled in her eyes, not anger, just exhaustion. "He's still your father," she whispered. "No," I said, standing. "He was my lesson. She didn't follow me when I left." The next day, Douglas released his court-ordered apology. The press conference was short, awkward, and televised live. He read from a prepared statement, his voice flat. "I regret the harm my actions have caused to Ensign Hartley, to the Navy, and to the community." When a journalist asked if he considered the punishment fair, he paused, then said, "Consequences have their own gravity." The words weren't his. They sounded borrowed from someone who had finally learned what they meant too late. In the weeks that followed, the noise began to fade. The media found new scandals, the public moved on. But within the Navy, something subtle had changed. At briefings, instructors referenced the incident as a case study in professional conduct. "Integrity isn't inherited," Captain Hayes told a class one morning. "It's earned, and sometimes it's defended." I stood in the back of that lecture hall, listening anonymous again. It was enough. Late one evening, I walked along the docks near the base. The sky was clear, the stars sharp. The water reflected the lights of the city across the bay. For the first time in months, my heart felt steady, its rhythm calm. I thought of the phrase Hayes had given me. Truth outranks power, and realized it wasn't just a principle. It was survival. It was how people like me endured men like Douglas and came out whole. When I returned to my quarters, I wrote the final line in my journal. Honor doesn't need applause. It only needs witness. And that, finally, I had. A month after the verdict, when the air around the base had settled and the journalists had finally packed up their cameras, I got a call from the visitor center. The officer on duty spoke in that careful tone reserved for sensitive requests. Ensign Hartley, a Mr. Douglas Vaughn, is here to see you. He's cleared under supervision. You're not required to accept." For a long moment, I just listened to the hum on the line. The name sounded foreign, now stripped of power. I could have refused, let the silence finish what the court had started, but closure doesn't come from avoidance. It comes from confrontation. "I'll see him," I said. The visitor center was quiet when I arrived, its walls lined with framed photos of ships and sailors long gone. A cold March light filtered through the glass. Douglas sat at the table nearest the window wearing a plain gray suit. No tie, no watch. His hair was thinner, his skin ashen. He looked smaller somehow, like time had folded him in. When he saw me, he stood halfway, then hesitated. "Elise," he said, voice rough. "Thank you for coming." I sat down across from him without answering. The glass partition between us was thin, but enough to make everything feel distant. He cleared his throat, fidgeting with the visitor badge clipped to his lapel. "I won't take much of your time. I needed to say something before the sentencing hearing." I waited. He met my eyes, and for a brief moment the arrogance was gone. I lost everything he said quietly. "The business, the house your mother... She left 2 weeks ago. I guess you win." He paused as if expecting sympathy. "Are you happy now?" I held his gaze, my voice steady. "No," I said. "But I'm free." The words landed between us like a verdict of their own. He flinched slightly, the old temper flashing in his eyes before fading into exhaustion. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he muttered. That day I was under pressure. I'd been drinking the night before. I was humiliated in front of everyone. "You humiliated yourself," I interrupted. "I just stopped covering for you." His jaw tightened. "I raised you." "No," I said softly. "You controlled me." "There's a difference." For the first time, he looked away out toward the flagpole, visible through the window. The wind tugged at the flag, making it ripple against the gray sky. He swallowed, then said, "Can you tell them it was an accident, that I didn't mean to hit you? Maybe then they'll reduce the sentence." I almost laughed, but the sound wouldn't come. "You called me a leech," I said slowly. "Do you remember?" His eyes darted back to mine, uncertain. "Leeches let go when they're full." I continued. "You never did." He blinked, not understanding at first, then the meaning hit him. His shoulders sagged. "You're really not going to help me." "I already did," I said, "by stopping you." His hand twitched on the table as though he wanted to reach through the glass, but he didn't. "You've changed," he said bitterly. "You sound like them now. The officers, the ones who think rules make them righteous." I tilted my head. "No," I said. "I sound like someone who survived you." The silence that followed was long, but not heavy. It felt like air finally clearing after smoke. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "They said the Navy's using that video in training now. JAG seminars, ethics briefings. They are, I confirmed. It's titled, 'When Honor is Tested.' They study the bystander response, the chain of command decisions, and the emotional threshold of composure." He gave a hollow laugh. "So I'm a lesson now." "You always were," I said. "You just didn't know it." His laughter died quickly, replaced by a hollow stare. "You think this makes you noble? You exposed your own family. Family doesn't survive on lies," I said. "It survives on truth. We just didn't have any left." He exhaled sharply and looked at his hands, the same hands that had once represented absolute authority in my life. They were trembling now. The guard by the door shifted slightly, checking his watch. Time was nearly up. Douglas glanced toward him, then back at me. "So this is it?" he asked. "You won't testify for leniency, no." He searched my face one last time, maybe hoping to find the child who used to fear him. Instead, he found the officer who had learned to stand still under fire. "Goodbye, Mr. Vaughn," I said, rising. "Next time you see a mirror, salute the man who destroyed you." He earned it. I turned before he could respond. The guard opened the door. The last sound I heard as it closed behind me was his voice cracking into a whisper I couldn't quite make out. Outside, the wind was sharp but clean. The flag above the base whipped in steady rhythm. I walked across the courtyard, each step lighter than the last. For years, I had carried the weight of his approval like armor mistaking survival for loyalty. Now I finally understood what freedom actually felt like. Quiet, steady, deserved. Later that week, the sentencing went as expected: 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, and a public apology broadcast to local networks. He read the statement from a courthouse podium, eyes dull, voice mechanical. "I take full responsibility for my actions toward Ensign Hartley and the United States Navy," he said. "I hope this serves as a lesson about restraint, accountability, and honor." The irony was complete. That clip, like the first, spread through military forums not as scandal, but as curriculum. The JAG Corps archived both recordings under the case study code OCS Newport Incident Ethical Conduct Under Provocation. Cadets would learn it for years to come. Captain Hayes sent me a short note afterward. "He became a warning. You became an example. Balance achieved." I printed it and pinned it inside my locker. One evening after drill, I returned to the visitor center parking lot and sat in my car watching the sunset over the bay. The light stretched gold across the water, warm and forgiving. I realized that for the first time since childhood, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I didn't need to win anymore. I just needed to live. I started the engine, the radio catching a faint broadcast of the Navy hymn, Steady Timeless. As I drove away, the base receded in the mirror, the flag shrinking against the horizon. The man who once controlled my life was now a footnote in a training manual. And me, I was just getting started. I moved out of the barracks a month after the sentencing, trading government quarters for a small rented room near Jamestown Bridge. The house overlooked the bay, its windows always open to the scent of salt and engine oil. It was quiet, too quiet at first, but the kind of quiet I'd spent years fighting for. My mornings began with the hum of seagulls and the faint whistle of wind through the bridge cables. I reported to the Naval Engineering Command at 0700 sharp, a desk job heavy with logistics, ship maintenance schedules, and design schematics. There was a comfort in numbers and systems. They made sense in a way people rarely did. Some of my new colleagues recognized me from the headlines, but no one mentioned it. They saluted, they nodded, and they let me work. It was mercy disguised as professionalism. The first email that mattered came 2 weeks into the new posting. The subject line read, "Thank you, ma'am." It was from a new OCS cadet, female, 21, trembling with uncertainty in her words. She wrote, "I watched your hearing. I was told to stay silent when something happened to me last year. You showed me that silence doesn't mean surrender. Integrity in silence, ma'am, that's what I learned from you." I read it twice, then printed it and pinned it beside my desk. More emails followed over the weeks from cadets, officers, even a retired Marine. They didn't want revenge, they wanted validation. Proof that doing the right thing wasn't weakness. I answered each one with the same sentence: "You define honor by what you endure and by what you refuse to endure again." Late one evening, as I finished drafting a report for the engineering division, a message popped into my inbox from Captain Hayes. The subject line was just my name. The body contained one sentence: "Proud of you, Ensign." That was all. I stared at it for a long time, the words simple, yet heavy. Hayes wasn't a man of embellishment. Praise from him meant acknowledgement, not consolation. I replied, "Thank you, sir," for reminding me that truth doesn't need permission. He didn't answer, and he didn't need to. Some communications didn't require reply, just recognition. Outside my window, the tide was coming in. The lights from the bridge reflected across the water like fractured glass. I thought about everything that had happened: the slap, the courtroom, the video, the silence that had followed. Justice had come, but it hadn't erased the memory. Healing wasn't about erasure, it was about ownership. In the small wardrobe by my bed, my service dress whites hung neatly in their plastic cover. I unzipped it for the first time since the gala. The fabric was clean, the brass polished but faintly on the right collar. There was still a blurred outline, a shadow of a stain from the day Douglas struck me. I had tried once to scrub it out, but the mark stayed. I realized I didn't want it gone anymore. It was proof not of weakness, but of survival. A scar the uniform had earned with me. I folded the jacket back into place, careful not to disturb the imprint. The Navy had taught me that symbols matter: the flag, the salute, the oath. But sometimes the quiet remnants of pain carried their own sacred weight. A reminder that peace isn't given, it's reclaimed. That night, I walked along the docks the same route I used during my first weeks in Newport. The sea was calm, the air cold enough to sting. Ships rocked gently in their berths, their hulls creaking like tired lungs. I found a bench overlooking the water and sat, hands in my pockets, eyes tracing the horizon. Somewhere beyond that darkness, other officers were standing watch keeping order in a world that often forgot what order cost. My phone buzzed again, another message this time from an unfamiliar address. It read simply, "You don't know me, but I was at the gala that night. Thank you for reminding us what real honor looks like." I smiled faintly, closed the phone, and slipped it away. The wind picked up, tugging at my hair, carrying the smell of the sea. For once, I didn't resist it. Peace wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with applause or redemption. It came quietly, like the tide returning, withdrawing constant. I stayed on the bench until the stars blurred and the horizon turned silver with dawn. Then I stood, saluted the flag flying above the harbor, and whispered, "I'm still here." The sun broke over the water, scattering gold across the surface. For the first time, I believed it. Have you ever had to lose everything just to find peace? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. October 2024 came with the kind of autumn light that turns everything into memory. The bay was calm that evening, the water along Newport's harbor smooth as glass, reflecting streaks of orange and gold across the hulls of moored ships. I sat on the edge of the pier, still in uniform after duty hours, cap resting on my knee. The gulls circled lazily overhead, their cries thin and distant. The world, for once, didn't demand anything of me. I let the silence settle until I could hear my own breathing, steady, unhurried. It struck me that I had lived for years waiting for storms, first in that house, then in my own mind. When chaos finally stopped coming, peace felt almost foreign. I leaned forward, watching the reflection of the flag ripple across the water. The day he hit me, I whispered to the wind, my heart stopped. But not from pain, from disbelief that I ever let him have that power. The words sounded strange, out loud, fragile but real. The day I spoke, I continued, it started beating again. Somewhere behind me, the chapel bell chimed 6 times. The sound rolled over the harbor low and solemn, like the Navy hymn I'd grown up hearing but never truly understood. Duty, courage, honor, they weren't about medals or approval. They were about surviving what should have broken you and choosing to rise anyway. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded letter I'd written the night before. The envelope was plain, the handwriting careful. It wasn't addressed to Douglas or my mother. It was addressed to the institution that had saved me by demanding more than I thought I had to give. I walked toward the Navy OCS Memorial near the base entrance, a granite monument engraved with names of fallen officers. Fresh wreaths lined its base. I knelt, placed my letter beside the flowers, and traced the carved words with my fingers, integrity above all. My note said only, "Thank you for giving me a place to stand when home became a battlefield." I signed it Elise Hartley, Ensign, United States Navy. For a while, I stayed there letting the wind lift the edges of the paper. I thought of every step that had brought me here, the humiliation, the courtroom, the silence, the long walk out of that visitor center. Each moment had felt like an ending, but they had been beginnings in disguise. Behind me, the base was alive with the muffled rhythm of evening drills, the distant cadence calls of younger cadets who hadn't yet learned that strength has a cost. I smiled faintly. They would learn, and maybe when their own storms came, they'd remember the story of the officer who refused to bow her head. As the sun sank lower, the air cooled, carrying the scent of salt and engine fuel. I stood, adjusted my uniform, and looked one last time at the harbor. The sky bled into copper, the kind of beauty that made pain feel small. Somewhere out there, the ocean waited vast, indifferent, honest. I had spent most of my life trying to earn peace from people who profited from my silence. Now I had found it in the quiet duty of my own heartbeat. I began walking along the pier, my steps echoing softly against the wood. A fisherman nodded as I passed. A young couple laughed in the distance. The world kept moving, and so did I. The camera, if it were there, would have followed me from behind the white of my uniform against the fading light, the flag waving faintly above the masts. Each frame would have said what words no longer needed to freedom and dignity aren't gifts. They are choices made again and again, even when no one's watching. I stopped. Once looked back toward the water and whispered the truth I'd earned the hard way. Honor doesn't come from who raised you, it comes from who you choose to become. Then I turned toward the setting sun and walked forward, steady, unafraid, my heart still beating.